Hi, I'm Anna, and welcome to the Sommpour Deep Cut. Today we begin with D2 Audible cheat sheets. This is built with the idea that quietly underpins almost everything in this unit. The price a consumer pays for a bottle of wine is not determined by cost alone. It is also shaped by supply and demand. WSET makes this distinction very clearly. The cost of growing grapes, producing wine, transporting it, importing it, and selling it all matter. And we'll walk through those carefully in the next episode. But even if those costs stay the same, the price of wine can still rise or fall depending on one simple relationship: how much wine is available to buy compared to how much people want to buy. Supply is the amount of wine available for sale. Demand is the willingness of consumers or businesses to buy. In wine, supply and demand is the balance between how much wine exists in the market and how much is actually wanted. In a perfect world, supply and demand would sit in balance. Producers would sell all the wine they make at prices that cover production costs, reward investors, fund future investment, and still leave a profit. Consumers would buy wines they enjoy in the styles they like at prices they're willing to pay. But wine is an agricultural product, and supply and demand are rarely in balance. Weather alone can dramatically affect supply. WSET gives a clear illustration. In 2013, unusually high spring and summer rainfall in normally arid Castilla La Mancha helped Spain produce 45.3 million hectoliters of wine. Just 4 years later, widespread spring frost across Europe contributed to the lowest global production for 50 years, and Spain produced only 32.5 million hectoliters. These swings matter because when supply exceeds demand, prices tend to fall as consumers have more choice and cheaper alternatives. When demand exceeds supply, prices tend to rise, but only if consumers believe there are no acceptable substitutes. Otherwise, they switch to another wine, another origin, or even drink another drink category altogether. To understand why this happens, WSET breaks demand and supply into clear influencing factors. Demand is shaped first by social factors. Consumption habits change over time. Global wine consumption grew strongly in the early 2000s, then fell back after the 2008 financial crisis as consumers reduced spending on non essential products. Although total consumption has not returned to pre crisis levels, the popularity of certain categories has increased significantly. Sparkling wine consumption, for example, grew by an average of 3% annually between 2002 and 2018, and rosé has seen major growth in the last decade. These changes are not uniform across markets. Consumption has been falling or static in traditional wine drinking countries such as France and Italy, while it has increased in countries where wine was not historically part of everyday culture. In 2011, the United States overtook France and Italy to become the world's largest wine consuming country, driven by globalization, increased openness to new tastes, and both higher volume and improved quality of domestic production. China provides another important example. Over the past 2 decades, a growing middle class has adopted wine as a symbol of status and aspiration, often favoring imported wines. Initially, this demand focused heavily on French wines, but it has since broadened to other countries such as Australia and Chile, helped by favorable trade agreements. While recent figures suggest a slight decline, WSET cautions that lower production estimates can distort apparent consumption numbers. Where wine consumption is falling, WSET identifies several causes. Younger consumers in many countries are drinking less wine, sometimes viewing it as old fashioned and choosing other drinks instead. Health concerns and increased awareness of alcohol's negative effects also play a role, reinforced by government policies. Busy modern lifestyles mean fewer long meals where wine was traditionally consumed, and in many countries, drinking alcohol during the working day is no longer socially acceptable. In addition, the reduction of cheap local wine in traditional producing countries, often due to policies designed to curb overproduction, has led some consumers to switch to other drinks rather than pay higher prices. Consumer preferences also evolve. Rosé and Prosecco have grown rapidly in popularity in recent years. When demand rises faster than supply, prices rise. However, when supply can be expanded, price increase may be limited. As the WSET highlights, the expansion of the Prosecco DOC area as an example is an example of increased supply moderating price pressure. At the same time, health concerns have increased demand for lower alcohol wines, while demand for fortified wines has declined. Styles can also fall out of fashion altogether, as seen with medium sweet German wines such as Liebfraumilch, which were once extremely popular but later lost favor as consumers shifted towards drier styles. Reputation matters as well. As the reputation of a region, producer, or individual wine improves, demand increases and higher prices can be justified. Positive reviews from influential critics and publications are particularly valuable, as are endorsements from online influencers and appearances in popular culture. Peer influence should not be underestimated. Conversely, a loss of reputation can reduce demand, although this often happens more slowly. Spending patterns also shape demand. In price sensitive markets such as Germany and the UK, many consumers are unwilling to pay more than the lowest possible price for a given style of wine. Competition in these markets is fierce, margins are tight, and some producers choose not to sell there at all. In contrast, in markets like the United States, many consumers are willing to pay more than the minimum to buy wines they perceive as higher quality. In recent years, even traditionally price sensitive markets have shown signs of premiumization, with consumers buying less wine by volume but paying more per bottle. Economic factors reinforce these trends. When disposable income falls during a recession, consumers tend to trade down to cheaper wines or switch to other alcohol drinks. During the recession following the 2008 financial crisis, demand for champagne declined while demand for cheaper sparkling wines increased. When economies grow, as seen in China, consumers are often more willing to buy expensive and aspirational wines. Currency fluctuations also affect demand, particularly for imported wines. When an exporting country's currency strengthens, its wine becomes more expensive in foreign markets, potentially reducing demand. When a currency weakens, wines may represent better value and sales can increase, although producers may face higher cost for imported equipment and supplies. WSET traces the growth of Argentine wine exports in the early 21st century to the competitive pricing created by a weak peso. Legislative and political factors also influence demand. Some countries prohibit alcohol sales entirely, while others tightly control them through monopolies or systems such as the three-tier structure in the United States. Even where alcohol is freely available, restrictions on hours of sale and legal drinking ages limit access and often raise price. Governments may also seek to reduce alcohol consumption through policies such as advertising restrictions, minimum unit pricing, drink driving limits, and taxation. WSET highlights the French Loavin, Scotland's minimum unit pricing, and reductions in legal blood alcohol limits in countries such as New Zealand and Scotland as examples of policies that have reduced consumption. Taxes play a significant role. Sales taxes and excise duties vary by country and by drink category, influencing demand. In Ireland, the much higher excise duty on sparkling wine compared to still wine has significantly reduced sparkling wine consumption. In contrast, Hong Kong abolished excise duty on wine in 2008 to position itself as a wine trading hub, leading to a surge in fine wine auctions. International trade policy can also reshape demand. Tariffs, trade agreements, and embargoes alter relative prices and consumer sentiment. WSET gives examples ranging from trade arrangements to the US China trade war and embargoes affecting Russia. Even after restrictions are lifted, negative consumer sentiment can persist. Turning to supply, production volume is the most obvious influence. One key factor is the area under vine. Generally, a larger vineyard area allows greater potential production. However, WSET notes that global vineyard data includes table grapes as well as wine grapes, and in countries such as China, a large proportion of vineyards are used for table grapes, limiting wine output. The area under wine has declined in many regions, particularly in the EU. This has been driven by vine pull schemes designed to address chronic overproduction, restrictions on planting new vineyards, conversion of vineyard land to higher value crops or property development, and the abandonment of rural areas as younger generations move to cities. Human factors can offset reductions in vineyard area. In Spain, for example, production has increased despite declining vineyard area due to irrigation, higher density planting, and modern viticultural techniques. Across the world, improved site selection, canopy management, pest control, mechanization, and modern winemaking have increased both yields and quality at prices consumers are willing to pay. Natural factors also shape supply. Weather variation can cause large year to year fluctuations, particularly in Europe, which accounts for more than half of the world's vineyard area. In 2017, frost, hail, and heat waves reduced European production by 14% compared to the previous year. Longer term climate change poses additional risks, with drought affecting regions such as South Africa and California, and projections suggesting widespread future irrigation shortages in Chile. Reduced yields generally push prices up, but consumers may resist higher price if quality also suffers. Legislation is another major influence on supply. The global growth of geographical indications defines where grapes can be grown and, in some regions, how wine can be made. Outside the EU, GI systems tend to be relatively flexible. In Europe, PDO systems can strictly limit varieties, yields, and production methods, constraining supply. One aim of these systems is to define regional style, and another is to align supply more closely with demand to support price level. However, rising demand can create pressure to expand GI boundaries, increasing supply but sometimes diluting quality. Some governing bodies actively manage releases to prevent oversupply, while more flexible systems such as the EU's PGI category allows greater responsiveness to market demand. Finally, WSET brings supply and demand together by examining the challenges of imbalance. Global wine production has consistently exceeded consumption, although the gap has narrowed in recent years. Oversupply leads to falling prices, unsold wine, and in some cases, sales below production cost. Producers may seek new markets or repackage wine as a private label, but heavy discounting can damage brand image. Undersupply is rarer globally but common for specific wines. It can strain relationships with buyers and lead to penalties if contracts are not fulfilled. While undersupply can drive price up in some prestige sectors, most producers prefer to manage scarcity through allocations. If origin is not important to consumers, substitution happens quickly, especially in price sensitive markets. So, in conclusion, by the WSET looks at contrasting a high volume, inexpensive branded Chardonnay with a low volume, super premium Cabernet Sauvignon. External pressures such as oversupply or economic downturns affect these wines very differently. This comparison captures the core D2 mindset. The same factor can have very different outcomes depending on price brand, volume, substitutability, and consumer sensitivity. I hope this helps with your prep, and I'll see you in the next episode where we follow the cost all the way through the bottle.